Okay, so good morning everyone and welcome back to the second of our Wednesday wisdom sessions. So the aim of these weekly sessions is to give you an overview of a typical topical HR issue, what our thoughts are and our solutions. So we get asked a lot of questions by our clients, as you can imagine, and we try to give you sort of the most commonly asked questions through these sessions. We really hope that you'll be able to join in with us every week, but obviously now that you're registered, you can join in at any point in time on any of the sessions, so just save the link. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things for you. I am going to just ask that you keep your microphones on mute just for the first part of the session. We did try leaving them on last week, but unfortunately some of the background noises picked up and came out on the recording, which obviously wasn't ideal. You can all unmute again at the end when we come to the question and answer sessions. And as Lisa's already mentioned, we are going to record this session. It'll just be the first bit until we get to the question and answer session. So the recording will literally only show the screen slides and myself talking. It won't show any of you. And I will turn the recording off when we get to the question stage. And that's just purely so we can share this session with anyone who hasn't been able to make it today. I've got Lisa on the session with me again today, and Lisa's going to keep an eye on the chat function for me. So if you have questions as we're talking, feel free to drop them on the chat. You can either do that privately to Lisa or in the group chat, and then obviously we'll answer them at the appropriate time. If you're not familiar with Zoom, then the chat function is usually down at the bottom of your screen. Just as a little point to note, these sessions are designed to kind of just give you some guidance. They're not designed as a full HR support session. So if you've got a specific case that you need help with, then please do talk to us outside of this session. We obviously can't comment on things that might be confidential. So today I'm going to go through 3 of the most commonly asked questions we've had over the past couple of weeks in relation to redundancy. So the first question we're getting asked a lot from people is, how do I choose who I make redundant? Now, sometimes the choice is really, really simple. So you might have one employee doing one role in one location and you just simply don't need them anymore. And that's fine. That's a fairly simple process. But what happens if you've got a team that you need to select from? So for an example, we've picked a sales team. So you've got 10 sales guys who operate in the Northwest. I'm not being sexist there, I'm using guys as a loose term, by the way. They do have individual areas that they work in, but all those areas can overlap. And in reality, they could probably, all of them could cover every area. You've decided that you need to reduce your staffing costs because your sales team are costing too much money and they're just not bringing enough revenue in. And you need to make those cuts. Now, hopefully you've done your figures and you know that you can now manage with a team of 8 going forward because your numbers are telling you that that will be the case. That'll make sure that all the areas are still covered and you've got enough work for everyone, and it'll make it easier for the remaining sales teams to hit their targets as well, because they'll have a slightly higher target audience to go at. It's really tempting when you're looking at this sort of situation to look at a kind of a traditional method, which you used to be kind of last in, first out, or, well, your face doesn't fit, so it's you, or maybe you're the youngest, so you have less responsibility, so you need to go. But each of those selection methods is really flawed. So say you get rid of your sales superstar because he's the last person that joined the business. You just got rid of your best performing member of staff just purely because he's only been with you for 6 months, whereas someone else has been with you for 2 years. You know, you could end up facing an age discrimination claim because you chose the youngest person or the oldest potentially. So this is where a scoring matrix comes in. And to do a scoring matrix, you would choose maybe 6 to 8 different criteria. And you can base those on different things. So it could be on skills, it could be qualification, it could be ability to do the job. So you might want to look at your performance reviews and your appraisals. In the instance where you're looking at someone like sales, you might want to look at how many targets each person's hit. And you can also factor in things like your attendance and your disciplinary records. So as long as you can measure the criteria that you are choosing, i.e. it's not just your opinion, you have a statistic to back that up, it's measurable and fair, and you can choose the most appropriate of those criteria. And then once you've put all your employees at risk of redundancy, and you share the selection matrix with them, and you make sure that they're happy with those criteria, so they all think that those criteria are a fair way of measuring the system. You would then set about scoring each of those individual employees. And it might actually be worth getting more than one person involved in this process, provided you're not breaching any confidentiality. So you may have a team of directors, for example, that can be involved. And then you all or both of you complete that scoring individually to make sure the scores match. They should do if they're factual scores, if they're based on criteria that you can measure. But it just helps to make sure you're not putting any personal opinion onto this. Then you need to take a look at the overall scores. So your two lowest, or it might be your highest, depending on which way around you've done your scoring. The two lowest scoring employees are those two that are now identified for redundancy. And then at your next consultation meeting, you need to discuss the employee's individual score with them and make sure that they are happy with that score. Do they agree with that score? Obviously, you're not going to discuss all the other scores with them because that's confidential to each person, but go through their score and explain to them why you've measured them the way you have. And you should be able to justify those scores to them because you should have specific measurable criteria. You then need to obviously notify those two employees that you've identified for redundancy that you are then confirming that they're redundant, and you would then proceed with that dismissal. But obviously make sure that the remaining 8 employees in this instance are told that they're no longer at risk and that they have retained their role. The selection matrix can be quite a complex process, so if you do need help with it, then please do ask us. We've got a lot of experience of dealing with that kind of thing, and we can help you draw those tables up. The second question we're getting asked a lot at the moment, obviously with the way things are, is what do we do when we've got an employee that just isn't right for the company? So they're a bit negative, they're a bit unmotivated, they might have come back from furlough and they don't really seem bothered about being there, they're not engaged with the team. Can we make them redundant? Well, the short answer to that question is no. So the reasons for redundancy selection. So yeah, the employer ceases to trade, the work that the employee carries out has gone, or the need to conduct the work at the location they're employed at has gone. So ultimately, a redundancy is about the role, not the person. So you cannot make a redundancy about the person or personal. If you made your square peg person redundant, you would leave yourself open to an unfair dismissal claim. So you also have to be really careful with redundancy that you're not discriminating as well. And if that employee has any of the protected characteristics and you try to make them redundant without a good reason, you're also going to then risk a discrimination claim, which is an uncapped award, and it could end up, causing bigger problems than actually doing the process in the first place with that person. So if you are having issues with that one person who just doesn't fit in with your team, there are lots of other solutions that we can help you with that are much, much less risky than looking at making them redundant. And the last of the 3 most frequently asked questions, especially with the furlough system and the way things are just now, is can I do it now? Can I start making redundancies now? If you've assessed your business future and you know that you need to make redundancies, so on the basis of one of those fair reasons we've just discussed, then yeah, you can absolutely start that process now. You don't have to wait until the furlough scheme ends to be able to start a redundancy process, as long as you've got that legitimate reason. Do bear in mind, if you've got more than 20 redundancies to make, you must consult for a minimum of 30 days before getting to dismissal. And if it's more than 100 employees, then that increases to 45 days. So you do need to plan ahead, especially if you're making that many redundancies. If you're making less than 20 redundancies, there's no official consultation length, but we generally advise the process should take place over the course of about 2 weeks. It could be shorter in some very simple situations. If your employees are on furlough, you can still claim the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme grant for any notice pay. So provided this is paid as working notice and not as a lump sum of pay in lieu of notice. So it's really worth planning ahead so that you can reduce your overheads as much as possible, because you could have your employee on notice for the next 4 weeks and claim back that 80% of their wage, keep them on furlough. You can also enforce annual leave during their notice period. So even if they're on furlough, and that you need to give them the right amount of notice for that. So that's double the time that you want them to take. So if you wanted them to take a week's leave, that'd be 2 weeks notice. So if you've got an employee who you intend to make redundant and they've got a week or two's accrued holiday there, you might want to be able to give them the notice to take that leave as soon as possible so that you can fold it all in together with the notice period rather than having to pay them a lump sum at the end. We do recommend that you keep your employees on furlough for as long as possible, so as long as is reasonable before making those redundancies. The scheme was set up as a way to avoid redundancies, so it's only right and fair to use it in that spirit. At the end of July, we all know that we'll start to incur some costs on that scheme. So from August, the only cost involved will be you can no longer reclaim your employer's national insurance and pension contributions. And then the cost for that goes up. So in September, you'll be contributing 10%, and in October, 20% towards their wage on top of what you already pay. So you do need to consider how much you can afford and get that timing right. So if you were to look at it and say you wanted to terminate someone's employment at the end of July, then that seems fair and reasonable. It may be that you can extend it to August if it's not going to cost you a lot with those contributions, but obviously you need to think about how much you can afford. Now, the reputational damage of making redundancies can be just as bad as the legal recourse of getting it wrong. Redundancies are never pleasant. I'm sure some of you have probably been in that situation yourselves where you've been on the receiving end of that. I know I have, certainly, and it's not pleasant, but if you handle them well and you support your employees, you can hopefully avoid them telling the whole world what an awful place you are to work. And if you don't believe that this happens and it has an effect, just think about the backlash that places like Sports Direct and Wetherspoons have had recently with the treatment of their staff when everything kicked off originally with coronavirus. The reputational damage that that's done to them could potentially be massive for them. And that's really the end of the 3 most frequently asked questions for us. So I'm going to pause the recording now, and then I'm going to throw over to Lisa to see if we've got any questions in the chat. So just bear with me.